When we're first laying down some simple shapes inside of our three-dimensional scene, we need to be very mindful of the default sculpting pose that we create for our character. Now, your reference should be a good guide into finding what that neutral sculpting pose is going to look like. So let's take a look at what a good neutral pose provides us inside of our entire sculpting sequence. So I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what my sculpting pose, my neutral pose for my grizzly bear is going to be. And here are a couple little tips. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we're modeling our character in a way that is not at an extreme emotional pose, okay? So we're not trying to depict in our sculpture a bear fishing out of a river or climbing up a tree. Ideally, the bear, in this case, should just be standing there in a neutral pose. What this gives us is the ability to work intelligently and efficiently through the sequence, because now we're not fighting against that emotional pose that we were talking about before. Our character is just standing there, and in doing so, having our character stand there allows us as the sculptor and our audience to really understand the anatomy of the sculpture and the structure of the sculpture. So what kind of defines that neutral standing pose? Well, if you look at our character from the side here, we have some pretty big cues, pretty big clues that are going to be helpful for us, okay? Now, first and foremost, what we need to look at here is that we need to look at the location of the spine itself. Trying to find some reference of your character where it's just kind of standing there, and that spine is a good place to begin, if not the best place to begin. And almost all of our characters, the entire locomotion is going to be generated from the spine itself. That spine almost kind of defines the life of this character. And you can start to see that life of my grizzly bear take shape in the spine on the right here. I've sculpted it at an angle. It's not perfectly horizontal. It's at an angle like it would be if the bear was standing outside of my door here, which it's not, thankfully, because that'd be terrifying. Anyways, okay, so we try to find the natural angle of the spine. That's a good place to begin in defining that neutral pose. Almost all characters are going to have a straight plane, not a straight spine, but a straight plane for their spine itself. Okay, now what I'm talking about here, this initial line is the plane of the spine, okay? Now, if you look at the actual spine itself, there's going to be a curve in there, right? So we're not trying to define that curve, we're trying to define the general angle, the general plane of that spine. Once you have that kind of established, there's some other important landmarks that you can flush out pretty quickly that will give you that good neutral pose. Specifically, there's a relationship between the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist, okay? Now, if you look at the way that I've modeled this, it's not perfectly vertical. All those joints are at a small angle to each other. And specifically what I'm talking about here, if I was to move this out of the way, here we go. What I'm not trying to do is do shoulder, elbow, wrist, all in one gigantic straight line, okay? This doesn't give us enough information to help us as the artist figure out some really big anatomy on the sculpture itself. Let me take you back to the model now, and we can take a look, okay? So once again, here's the shoulder, here's the elbow, and here's the wrist. Now I'm starting to figure out that gentle bend in the elbow itself. There's some things that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, and you see this almost in all characters, especially in the early stages, that we have the shoulder up here, you have the shoulder up here, and then the wrist is down here. Now there's almost a straight line, and I'm a little off on mine, and I did that intentionally, but there's almost a straight line between the center of our shoulder and the center of our wrist, okay? This creates a three-point chain in which we can begin to establish some good sense of weight and mass, okay? So if we have 2 points in our circle that are directly in line with each other, that third point then becomes a natural compression spot on the leg, or the arm in this case, and gives us that lovely bend in the elbow. You see this with our hips in our characters. For humans, you see this all over the place, where our shoulders shoulders are in the exact same location as our heels. That perfect straight line between those 2 points creates a tremendous amount of stability in the pose itself. I've accentuated that stability back here where our character begins to have a lot of its weight. I could have even pushed it a little bit more if I liked it. If I liked it to. Here's its hip, and then of course its ankle is way down there at the bottom itself. Okay, almost in a perfect straight line. Those are good places to begin when defining our neutral pose. Okay, so we've talked about the spine, we've talked about the hip, the joint location here. All good things to consider when we're creating that neutral starting pose. One other thing I like to do with the arms in the front, and you can see this a little bit in the back. I try to have a little bit of an angle in here, just a touch, not too much of an angle in all of these joints. This is going to help me as a sculptor start to establish this really important part of these natural folds right here. The creases that we're going to get in the inside of the elbow and of course the back side of our knee. Sculpturally, those can be kind of a challenge to establish, so if we can help our future sculptor out a little bit, that's always a good thing. So I try to put those in pretty early as well. In addition to ensuring that our model works from the side, it's important that we also consider what it looks like from the front and from the top. This neutral pose should be a three-dimensional pose, okay? And from the front here, there's some cool things that are happening that specifically I've designed for this object itself. Now, if we take a look-see here, I want you to notice that the location of our arms and our hands is in a fundamental different location than the feet in the back. There's a taper. It's wider in the back and narrower in the front, which suggests that the hips are bigger in the back and the shoulders are slightly smaller in the front, just like what my reference has communicated to me. So it's a great opportunity to start looking and discovering some of these small little details. You'll see this again here in a second when we start talking about the top of our character. Okay, now lastly, I'm also looking at the location of the shoulders themselves, the height of the shoulders in relationship to the ground. We can't forget about that really super critical component. There is a very big relationship between the ground of our character and the shoulders, okay? So spend some time looking at that, trying to figure out what the appropriate height is. That's a good starting point for that neutral pose. Too low, if the shoulders are too close to the ground, you're going to get this really weird, uncomfortable bend in the arms and in the legs. And too high, it's going to look like our legs are tent poles holding up this mass. This is something that we kind of have to fiddle with. I don't have a magic bullet solution. There is no formula that's going to help us establish this. As an artist, this is just something that we need to look at as we go through our process to define these relationships between all these different planes. Now, just real quickly here, I mentioned earlier that the hips in the back are much wider than the shoulders in the front. So you get this lovely kind of trapezoid shape inside the scene itself, and I think that's pretty cool. It's a three-dimensional sculpture. We're changing the proportions and the scale of these really important anatomical features from all angles inside of our mesh. This default pose in every sense is going to help us provide us with a really strong foundation for us to sculpt on. So don't hurry through this stage. In every sense, we're creating the ground floor of the entire production sequence for our sculpture, so slow down a little bit. Enjoy working with these simple shapes, because if it doesn't work now, it's never going to work in the future stages. There's no magical fix, if you will, to some of these proportions and to some of these posing choices that we make early on. So this default neutral pose is super important. It gives us the sculptural information that we need, and it also sets the stage for success later on inside of our sculpting sequence.